Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for watching and listening to Talking Sports with Evan. I'm your host, Evan Witalison, and have a bunch of stuff to talk about today. I'm going to talk some baseball draft. Milwaukee Bucks game 5 is tonight and about an hour away. No Trey Young or Giannis at all for game 5. So going to give my thoughts on if I think the Bucks can still win this series without Giannis, which you'll find out later on in the show. Brewers are red hot right now, but obviously they can look to improve and get better. And I don't just mean for 2021. I also mean down the road as well. And with the draft coming up, I do have from baseballprospectjournal.com writer and founder Dan Zielinski joining me here. And that's where we're going to start with the show here today. And before I go any further, Dan, thank you so much for spending some time here with me this evening. I know it's super busy time right now with the baseball draft coming up and whatnot. So I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, it's great to join you. Great to talk to you again, Evan.
Yeah, it's been a while. I know we used to do some work together for one of the sports talk stations in Milwaukee, and then, we've kind of gone our separate ways,
For sure. Yeah, those are some fun times. Great always covering Brewer games with you and stuff. So looking forward to talking to you about the draft here for a few minutes.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It was definitely fun times and fun covering the games. You, myself, I think, Chuck, majority of the time, most of the time. So before we do go further, I did mention, your site. Can you just, kind of explain to the listeners, the viewers, a little bit about your site and what you offer and kind of how they can also find, I do have your Twitter account. Hopefully the spelling's right. Tick on the bottom ticker here if you want to let people know how to find your work.
Sure, yeah. So I founded baseballprospectjournal.com, I want to say in 2019 now, and write stories on all the top draft prospects every year. This year, I interviewed and wrote stories on 103 of the top guys. So primarily the website is focused on draft coverage, but I also dabble in prospect coverage once these guys do turn pro, as well as have some writers who also write about some of the top prospects across baseball. So just a place that's kind of digs deep into the prospect coverage, especially when it comes to the draft. You can find me at baseballprospectjournal.com, as well as on Twitter at Dan Zielinski3 or at the BP Journal on Twitter. So
Cool. Well, again, I mentioned I appreciate you coming on. And, the baseball draft last year, this year, different than typically years past because I think this year correct me if I'm wrong, it's 20 rounds
correct.
as opposed to what is it typically?
It was typically 40 rounds. And then last year with the pandemic, they shortened it up to 5 rounds. And then this year it's shortened again, but now to 20 rounds.
Are they looking to move it back to 40, do you think, at some point, or they feel, 20 might be a good place to have it at?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see with the collective bargaining agreement coming up here in December. It really seems like the draft is going to be one of those hot button topics just as a leverage for the players union and baseball, but I really expect it to be 20 rounds or right around that number, maybe 25 moving forward. It's just a practical amount. Once you would get past 20, 25 rounds, with the last 10 to 15 rounds being more courtesy picks, taking a chance on a guy who's kind of determined to go to college, but hoping to draft him, maybe convince him otherwise. So I really think, and scouts and agents also kind of agree 20, 25 rounds is really kind of the ideal amount.
Yeah, 40 is quite a bit. And obviously some guys, really good players have come later in the draft, but you don't hear about it a lot. So as you're saying, it's probably a lot more like kind of filler courtesy type move. So, Brewers last year, took Garrett Mitchell, outfielder that fell to them at 20. I know some people have him potential, early first round pick. He fell to 20. Brewers have drafted kind of like, I would say, looking back at their history, combination of college and high school guys. Do you kind of notice a trend on where the Brewers typically like to take people out of college, out of high school? It just kind of depend from year to year.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, over the last 5 years, they've used their top pick on college guys. Primarily 4 of their last 5 years, they've selected a college guy with their top overall pick. And it really seems like that's kind of the Brewers' philosophy, is drafting, whether it's college guys or just players who are a little bit more polished, but also possess still some upside. They also like to go after guys who look good analytically in terms of whether that's on the mound or even offensively with those analytical numbers. So they definitely have a philosophy, and they definitely tend to lean towards college or otherwise guys who are a little bit more polished and have had success against premium pitching or premium talent.
And obviously, there's no perfect science to drafting in any sport. And I think baseball, to me, is one of the harder sports to draft for, because you just never know. A few years back, Brewers took an outfielder out of, I want to say, Louisville, and Corey Ray, who had all the tools in the college game that looked like he was going to be a quick to the big leagues type of guy. And he's still sitting in AAA, and he's still struggling to make contact with the baseball. So I guess, obviously, you don't hit most of the time in baseball, I guess it's safe to say.
No, baseball is definitely one of the most difficult drafts to do every year, because like you said, it's just so hard for these guys to develop and also to predict which guys are going to be stars. I mean, you look at Corey Ray, for an example, you laid it out perfectly. A guy who was a 5-tool player at Louisville, expected to move through a system quickly and be a starting center fielder by now at least. And that obviously hasn't been the case. He's struggled with strikeouts, struggles to make contact. You can even look at Keston Hiura. He's been up and down for the Brewers this year, a guy who, coming out of college, everyone knew was not going to be a premium defensive player, had elbow issues. People thought first base, left field, maybe second base was going to be his future home. And the defensive scouting has been accurate with him, but people thought he was going to be an offensive-minded guy, someone who hits over 300 with a lot of power, and we haven't seen that for the most part with the Brewers and Keston Hiura. So baseball is definitely a difficult draft, and it's definitely a science, and you also need a little bit of luck when you're selecting guys, because you never know who's going to pan out.
Yeah, you definitely don't. And I guess I should warn, a comment here that I get he has struggled. He's starting to come around now, but I'm a big Keston Hiura supporter, because to me, he's a guy that how can he not root for him? Seems like a very likable guy, and he's had success everywhere he's been. And now he's switching positions, learning a new position. I know he's got some family issues, health issues with his family going on, but he's definitely showing over the past 7 games the Keston Hiura we saw back in 2019 when he first came, which I think that's a very promising sign.
No, I totally agree. And I remember talking to a scout before the draft that year about Keston Hiura, and he said that Keston Hiura is going to be one of 2 players, either a guy who hits well above 300 and doesn't hit as many home runs, or a guy who hits 275 maybe, but hits a lot of home runs. And it seems like Keston Hiura has kind of chosen to be more of that power over average guy instead of average over power. And I would like to see him get back to more of that contact oriented approach. A guy who's still going to hit 25 home runs, but hits for a better average, has a little bit better plate discipline. But like you said, he is starting to maybe figure it out here, and hopefully that continues for the Brewers' sake.
Yeah, because I remember, it might have, I don't know, I think it was Sparky was commenting that's, I don't know if it was the same person you talked to or you told him this or told him that story or what, but he had mentioned that when Hiura first got caught up in 2019, that he's a guy that can either battle for batting championships or hit home runs. He kind of, it's kind of going to be up to him on what he wants to do. So hopefully that continues. I know last year, COVID, very weird baseball season, didn't get to have any minor league season. You just had your alternative site for in case you needed to bring guys in. And the draft last year, Brewers took outfielder Garrett Mitchell. And I work part-time at a station in Milwaukee. We do a Brewer post-game show. Matt Pauly, great job of doing the show. We have a caller every day, every show. Well, at least he calls. Always having the same question about Garrett Mitchell. Like, when is he going to make it this season? Is he going to be on the big league roster at all this year? So obviously he seems to be pretty popular too. What are your kind of thoughts on him, and how soon do we see him start climbing up that minor league ladder?
No, that's a great question. I know Garrett Mitchell definitely drew a lot of interest after the spring training he had. And frankly, I was surprised he was still on the board when the Brewers drafted last year. He was a guy I thought would be an easy top 10 pick just because of his tools. I mean, he's a 5-tool guy. Probably could be a little bit better of a power hitter, but still, I think he really could definitely be a 5-tool player. And he's someone who's going to move through a farm system quickly. It's kind of a similar profile as Corey Ray. But I would expect Garrett Mitchell to probably be knocking on the door maybe next September, but I think 2023 is a realistic kind of time frame. That gives him 2 full years of minor league baseball and also allows him just to develop without the Brewers necessarily having to rush him. And if you look at the Brewers outfield situation in general, with Lorenzo Cain locked up for another year, Christian Yelich obviously has got the big deal. They don't necessarily have to rush him unless they need to, but baseball teams are moving guys quicker and quicker through the farm system. So it wouldn't shock me to see him late 2022, but I think 2023 is a realistic kind of time frame for him.
So you've two questions here. Does he likely finish this year at Biloxi? And I know one of the things I heard, the reason why he dropped a little bit, and I know the Brewers have experience drafting a guy who deals with diabetes, but I heard that was some of the rumblings on why he fell. Like, do you know, like, what reasons did he fall down to 20?
Yeah, that was definitely one of the bigger concerns with him, and just how that would impact his durability or stamina over a full course of 162 games. Also, teams wanted to see a little bit more power out of him in college, but I think definitely kind of the diabetes aspect didn't help his cause by any means. It maybe caused him to fall a little bit down the draft board, but I think other teams miss. It could be the Brewers' gain in the long run because they were willing to take, I don't even want to say a risk, but a slight risk on a guy maybe some other teams were a little more skeptical on.
Yeah, and correct me if you have a different view on the Brewers farm system than I do, but I look at the Brewers farm system. You hear the term top heavy, but the Brewers are opposite. They're very bottom heavy with their farm system. They have a lot of, looks like intriguing guys at low ball, high ball A, Biloxi, but their AAA team, other than, Ashby and Small, they don't really have a lot there. Obviously they got guys who've played in the big leagues before, like Hernan Perez, but they don't really have much to me, prospects at the AAA level. Is that kind of the same view you have, that they're very bottom heavy right now?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I mean, I think, unfortunately, if you're a Brewers fan, they probably have one of the worst farm systems in terms of elite talent in Major League Baseball. Garrett Mitchell is certainly a quality prospect. So is Bryce Terang. And I know people are high on Ethan Small. I still question a little bit what his ceiling is. I still think he probably profiles more as a middle of the rotation guy. So besides some of those guys I just rattled off, they don't have someone who's close that's going to be a superstar player, at least on paper right now. So I definitely agree. It's more kind of middle to bottom heavy with average prospects than it is with the elite prospects. It is going to be interesting to see. They have made some kind of headway with signing some guys in the international market over the last couple of years. I know Adbert Perez, the outfielder in rookie ball right now, who's only 18, he does draw a lot of great reviews, but he is a younger player. So they might have some kind of lottery tickets in their system that definitely could be big time players in the future. But I tend to agree, like we've already discussed, that they're kind of lower to mid-level prospects overall throughout the system.
Yeah, and it's going to take several more years for the majority of them to get to Milwaukee. Obviously, Mitchell, being a college prospect, is probably going to be quicker than the other guys at Appleton. When you look at the team right now, the corner infield spots could use some work. They just don't really have much for the most part. When you look at the draft list here, where do you see them probably targeting? Any particular position, any particular area, and where do you feel they should target?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's easy to see the glaring holes at first and third this year on the major league roster. But it seems like if you look at the Brewers' kind of track record, they prefer to go kind of up the middle players in the draft most of the time. So I really expect them to kind of continue that philosophy simply because there's just more value with guys who play up the middle instead of at one of the corners. You can get more of those guys later in the draft that are very similar or even in free agency. I really expect them to go probably college at this point. The top guy I would have the Brewers taking right now is Colton Cowser, an outfielder out of Sam Houston State. He's someone I've mocked to them in the last couple mock drafts I've done. And there's really a lot to like about Cowser. He's a 6'1", 195-pound left-handed hitter who's got intriguing average and power ability. He's obviously does it from the left side, and he's a guy who really uses all parts of the field. He also, one thing I like a lot about him is his strike zone discipline. This past season, he drew 42 walks, had only 32 strikeouts, and then he's also spraying the ball all over the field. So I think he's definitely an intriguing player and someone who profiles as a center fielder in pro ball. It'll be interesting too to see what happens with Cowser. He's someone who's drawing some rumblings as a potential number 5 overall pick to the Orioles. But if he doesn't go to the Orioles, I definitely could see him being in the 10 to 15 range, with the Brewers obviously being at pick number 15. So he might be someone that's still on their board. And I think if they could get him, that would be a big win. But I think right now it seems like they're going to go college. There is a couple of maybe high school guys they would consider, but college seems like the more likely option here about a week and a half out.
You mentioned Cowser. On the baseballprospectjournal.com, you have an article that posted today, I believe. You have a few other guys too that you had mentioned. Another outfielder, Sal Frelick.
Yeah,
Is that right?
So,
and then you have Jordan Wicks, Harry Ford, and then a pitcher I've heard mentioned a lot, Gunnar Hoagland.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on those guys? I mean, what in particular attracts them to Milwaukee for you?
Sure. Well, obviously, first, they all play up the middle, and I think that's something that's valuable for the Brewers, as I mentioned earlier. They also are guys that analytically meet some of that criteria the Brewers would be looking for, and also just have that kind of profile overall the Brewers have sought in recent drafts. Starting with Sal Frelick, he's a guy who's more of a top-of-the-order type hitter, 5'9", 175 pounds, left-handed hitter, more average over power, but I still think there's some room to tap into that power, maybe 15, 20 home runs.
Especially at AmFam Field.
Yeah, exactly. And even if he doesn't tap into that power, he's going to be a guy who's going to hit over 300, has the plate discipline, has speed to make a difference on the base paths or defensively. And he's someone who has played all around the diamond throughout his career. I think he's probably best suited in center field, but I know talking to some scouts, they would even be interested in seeing him playing at second base. He was a high school infielder. He's also played a little infield in college, mostly in summer ball and fall ball, but still has that experience. So he's definitely another guy like Hauser who's getting some interest with the Orioles at 5, but could be on the board there in the teens, potentially with the Brewers. And then talking about the two pitchers you mentioned, first Jordan Wicks, the left-handed.
Definitely big guys.
Yeah. Out of Kansas State, Jordan Wicks, he's 6'3", 220. A lot to like with him. He's not the most overpowering guy. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Ethan Small in terms of the profile, with being a low 90s fastball that's really good analytically but doesn't have premium velocity. He also has the best changeup in this year's draft class. He also just attacks the strike zone consistently, barely walks guys, and really isn't afraid to challenge guys. So a lot to like with him, competitive, great makeup from talking to him. And even though he doesn't have a huge ceiling, profiling more as a middle of the rotation arm, I still think he kind of fits that Brewers mold of what they look for early on in the draft in terms of pitching. And Gunnar Hoagland's a little bit similar to Jordan Wicks in the sense that he's not an overpowering guy. He increased his fastball velocity into the mid-90s this year, but otherwise had usually been low 90s. The one thing with Hoagland, though, is that he suffered an elbow injury underwent Tommy John surgery this year. Otherwise, we were probably talking about a top 10 pick with Gunnar Hoagland, the right-handed pitcher out of Ole Miss. But size-wise, 6'4", 220, one of the best controlling command pitchers in this year's draft. Doesn't have big-time fastball velocity, but his secondary pitches are good, and he attacks the zone and doesn't walk out. So another quality asset. And then Harry Ford is kind of the most intriguing guy on this list because he is a high school catcher out of Georgia, and a high school catcher, that demographic has just been absolutely brutal in the first round in the draft over the last 12 years, but even farther back than that. I mean, if you look at the last 12 years in the draft, 11 prep catchers have been drafted, and I could probably name off all these guys, and you would probably, Evan, only know maybe one or two, maybe three of them. So it's definitely a more risky demographic. But the one thing that intrigues teams about Harry Ford is that his athleticism and speed could allow him to profile at second base or in the outfield. He definitely offensively is solid for a prep guy. So that'll be someone to watch because he is generating some top 10 buzz as well. But if the Brewers don't go college, Harry Ford, I think if he's on the board, could definitely be an option, even though he is that riskier demographic at catcher. But it wouldn't also shock me if the Brewers moved him from behind the plate to a second base or outfield, or even just start him off at catcher and kind of look to see what he would do early on in his first couple of years of pro ball.
Yeah. And, we had talked about, baseball. I'm trying to find the article that you had. Think it was from your site, but it was talking about the Brewers, I almost said Packers, the Brewers not having a lot of success in the first round recently.
Sure.
You mentioned Hira has been better, but struggling for the most part over the last couple years. A couple pitchers many years back, Youngman, I forget the other pitcher they drafted that year.
Yeah.
Where do you when you look at obviously for some of those they didn't have Stearns. I think Melvin was still part of that. I think Ray Montgomery was part of that too. I don't think Montgomery's with the team anymore. Correct me if I'm wrong. But where do you see the issues lying with the Brewers when it comes to draft? And what are your, I guess, thoughts so far on, led by Stearns, they're drafting?
Yeah, I mean, I always like going back and looking at I always do an article every year, their last 10 first-round draft picks or last 10 years of their first-round draft picks. And it's interesting to look at, too, because, like you said, they haven't had a lot of success. And that's part of the reason why they're in the position they are in with having one of the worst farm systems in baseball. Where do I put the blame on that? It's hard to say because in the first round, a lot of people have a say in it. It's not just the scouting director and the scouts and area scouts and cross checkers. It's also the GM and other front office people. Because there's so much invested in the first round, a lot of more people go and look at the top guys and also kind of deliberate on these other top first round prospects. So where do I put the blame? I think it's just a organizational philosophy and also just a little bit of bad luck. Now, they have been better in recent years over the last 3 or 4 years in terms of at least drafting guys who have had success, whether that's in their system or somewhere else. Obvious example is formerly Trent Clark when he was drafted, but now Trent Grisham with the Padres. He's been really good. And then Bryce Terang and Garrett Mitchell are two guys who, if they're not already in people's top 100 for baseball prospects, those are two guys who are going to be in the conversation sooner than later for being some of the top 100 prospects in baseball. So I think they're definitely getting better. It's just the Brewers also have taken college guys primarily over the last decade early on in the draft. And when you take college guys, you're really counting on them to move quick through a farm system. And when they
Not be a Corey Ray.
right, and when they don't, then you're kind of stuck because these guys are 21 coming out. If they spend 3 or 4 years in the minor leagues kind of struggling a bit, you're looking at a guy who's 25 years old, doesn't possess as much upside as a guy who was drafted out of high school at 18, who would have only been early 20s at that point. So the Brewers haven't been as risky in the first round, so that I think lends it to some of their problems. And it's just also a matter of luck. I mean, again, they haven't had always the best luck when it comes to drafting either.
No, definitely guys who gets drafted shortly after them, because I know the year Jose, is it Fernandez?
Yeah.
Got drafted. He got drafted like a pick or two after Milwaukee. So definitely have had some bad luck on the guys immediately after or immediately before turning into very talented players at the big league level.
They even when the Angels took Mike Trout, I want to say the Brewers were the pick right after selected Mike Trout. So I mean, again, when it comes to the draft, it's such a crapshoot because some of these guys look great on paper, have great prep college careers, and then all of a sudden they get into this completely different environment where they're traveling all the time, they're playing all the time, and they just don't adjust, or their skills don't adjust for whatever reason to pro ball. So definitely a difficult strategy when it comes to the draft.
And what are your looking at the team this year, the big league team? Currently 6 games up in the division after sweeping the Cubs, kind of embarrassing them a little bit too on the first and third game of the series as well. 8-game winning streak. You got Corbin Burnes, who 2 years ago people wanted to ship out of town on the next taxi out of there. Brandon Woodworth, Peralta, Williams, Hader. These are guys. I know Hader they got from another team, but for the most part, guys that they've brought from within their own system. Looking like a team that's going to be competing until, game 162. What are your thoughts on the team currently, and what do you feel they need to do to make that push into the postseason?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of funny looking at the Brewers now because a lot of years they were an offensive first team who struggled to develop pitching and necessarily didn't have great pitching too. And now it's kind of the opposite.
They had to sign guys like Kyle Loesch and Jeff Suppan, Matt Garza to basically help with the pitching.
Yeah, and now I know their offense has gotten a lot better of late, especially since they've acquired Willie Adames, which I love that trade from the beginning. I was kind of confused why Brewer fans didn't like it at first, but that's a whole nother topic. But their pitching has been phenomenal. When you have a guy like Brandon Woodruff and Corbin Burnes 1-2 in your rotation, and then also Freddie Peralta, I mean, that's going to be tough to beat come a postseason series. And then you still have Hader as the closer. They haven't traded him, and obviously they're not going to now because they're in contention once again this season. So he's at the back end of the rotation. I think they need to get Devin Williams right too. He's hasn't lived up to last year. I don't think anyone expected him to be that good, but he's also struggled at times. So it would be nice if they could maybe add another bullpen piece or even a back end of the rotation starter just to help carry them through, because Brett Anderson hasn't been great. Eric Lauer's been inconsistent.
Except when he plays NL West teams.
Right. So I think they need to more add a back end of the bullpen type piece to set up Josh Hader, and I think that pitching staff would be pretty solidified at least come postseason time. And then we've talked about it; they need to address the corners. I don't know if that's going to trade for Jesus Aguilar or if it's going to make a big play at Trevor Story and then move Adames to third. They've got a lot of question marks when it comes to that offense in the infield on the corners. And they still got guys like Jackie Bradley Jr., who's struggled for the most part this season. Lorenzo Cain can't stay healthy and looks like he's past his prime. So offensively, they're doing well of late. Adames has been a huge addition, and hopefully Christian Yelich can kind of figure things out and get closer to the MVP Yelich than he's shown at times this year where he's kind of struggled. So I think if they could add a bat and add a back end of the bullpen type arm, I think they'd be pretty solid.
Yeah, and as someone, when the trade happened, who was kind of not a huge fan of it, I can kind of explain my reasoning to you a little bit. Because, and I get you wanted to show the Urias and Lauer trade worked for you because you saw what Grisham did last year. And Davies got the Padres Yu Darvish now, who's one of the Padres, better pitchers. So you wanted Urias to succeed at shortstop. That's why you traded him. And when they traded Orlando Arcia, who, yes, he leaves a lot to be desired on his on-field play, especially with the bat in his hand. He did offer a lot of clubhouse leadership, though, too. And you traded him away. It's basically like, I'm giving this job to a guy who hasn't shown he can produce yet at the major league level. And then when it didn't work out, it was almost looking like, now you're panicking. Now we have to fix this. So you send basically your 7-inning guy and a guy who looks promising at times, because now you have to fix the shortstop position. So we're weakening the bullpen because we screwed up at the shortstop. But obviously it worked out great for the Brewers, because Adames has been amazing. Urias has been really good at third base. And the defense on that side of the field is almost, like there's nothing going through there at all. So I think for me, and I some reason, Arcia is a very likable guy, like in Arcia. It was just kind of stunning at the time that it happened. But Willy Adames has definitely made up for it, and then some.
Yeah, I mean, I don't fault them for trying to give Luis Urias a chance at shortstop, because he was a former top 10, 20 prospect in baseball, has loads of talent, as we've seen throughout this season and previously as well. So I didn't fault them for necessarily giving him a chance to kind of produce. But once he started struggling defensively, especially making 2 errors a game, it seemed like every other game, they definitely had to do something. And Rasmussen and Firehausen both were talented, big arms, but I also thought at times they were a little inconsistent, especially Rasmussen. He kind of always worried me when he would come in, because he did have that big time fastball velocity, but sometimes he kind of lost control of his pitches and struggled. So I was all right trading from a strength of your team to help a weakness. And I mean, plus Willy Adames, he has always struggled to hit at Tropicana Field for whatever reason. He never saw the ball well. I know he wore some special glasses too to try to help him see, but he only hit 217 at Tropicana Field, where he was playing half of his games, and
almost 300 away from there.
Right. And and he's still a young guy too, and was a former top prospect himself. I mean, only 25 years old, almost 26, will be later this year. So I definitely felt they had to do something at that position, and to only give up 2 relievers, not tap into your farm system that's already weak and deal from that aspect. It was a risk, but I think obviously now it's paid off, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do to kind of address now their bullpen, if they do come the trade deadline, to maybe add another piece back to it.
Is Ashby and Small somebody that could potentially be like this year's version of Corbin Burns and Woodworth? They brought them up back in 2018. Burns pitching out of the bullpen that year. Could one of those guys be that version or that person?
Yeah, I think Ashby is more likely. I know he got off to a terrible, frankly, debut yesterday, but he's been kind of the guy the Brewers have been prepping for, like a relief role. They recently moved him to the bullpen at AAA, and there is a lot to like with Ashby, and I think right now he kind of reminds me of a Josh Hader type, a guy who's got a really good fastball and almost an elite slider when it's on. He's pretty much more of a 2-pitch guy. His changeup is good and flashes above average potential, but he's more of a 2-pitch guy right now, and also struggles at time with walking guys, which kind of
saw yesterday.
Exactly. So I think he's more likely to be up come end of July, August, because the Brewers have kind of prepped him for that reliever role. And I think with his maybe command and control struggles, I think he might be better in just a 1 or 2 inning appearance, because he's able just to throw his fastball and slider. Then he's not facing a lineup 3 times and can just let it loose a little bit and let it fly with that fastball, and then hopefully strike guys out with the slider. So I think he's more likely to be in the big leagues this year once again, once he gets called back up, probably at some point. Ethan Small is pitching well, and he's now at AAA. I'm going to be very curious to see what happens with him. I think he's a guy who, frankly, could be ready for the major leagues right now. We talk about teams wanting to move their guys quickly, and Ethan Small was drafted in 2019. Really didn't have a season last year because they only had the alternative site. so he didn't really get to face live competition, at least from other guys that are not Brewers prospects. So Ethan Small, I think, could very well see his way in the major leagues, especially if you see Brett Anderson or even if Lauer kind of struggles. If they don't have an answer at the back end of their rotation, I think you could see Ethan Small up in the majors too.
Yeah, and I'm definitely intrigued by him. So want to say thank you for coming on, spending some time talking some Brewers and draft with me. I'm going to talk some Bucks basketball in a moment, but just kind of get your thoughts quick. Game 5, no Trae Young, no Giannis. Who do you think gets Game 5 tonight? Bucks because they're at home, or do the Hawks get up 3-2?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch. I mean, last game you would have thought the Bucks would have won that game without Trae Young, and then Giannis Antetokounmpo goes down with the injury, and they get pretty much blown out. And I'm shocked they didn't play with a sense of urgency after Giannis left Game 4. And I think Game 5 at home, they know Giannis is out. Middleton's got to step up and be that go-to guy that he shows sometimes, but doesn't do every game or consistently enough for the Bucks to kind of make quicker work of their opponents. So I think the Bucks get this win. Budenholzer's got to make some adjustments. Drew Holiday, Middleton have to step up. And I think I'm hoping Budenholzer plays Bobby Portis more because I think he should be playing a lot more than he has.
Yeah.
He's athletic. He can score. We'll see.
Yeah, and so I get why he didn't play much against the Nets because it wasn't good matchups for him, but he's shown in this Hawk series that he can definitely do damage. So, yeah.
What do you think about Budenholzer? Do you think he's gone regardless of how the season finishes out?
Well, if they somehow win the finals, I think you don't fire him just for the fact that who's going to want to come be your coach if you're firing your guy after you win the finals. I think that'll be a very tough sell. I think if they fall short, which now they have an excuse. Hey, we didn't have Giannis for the rest of the series or the rest of the playoffs. But I think if they fall short this round or in the finals, I personally think it's time to move on from him. 3 years, and it's right now shaping up to be 3 disappointing finishes. Hopefully, the Bucks surprise everybody and gets to the finals. It's obviously going to be tough hill to climb. But if they win the finals, he starts next year as the coach. If they struggle at all out of the gate, then I think they make a change.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. You would think the players would kind of step up without Giannis and play for Giannis and Budenholzer, who's definitely on the hot seat. So
yeah, they seem to like him quite a bit.
Yeah, this is their best shot at winning a title. That's why it's so frustrating, Giannis being hurt now. But we'll see what happens. It's going to be competitive.
Yeah, up until Game 4. Everything in the playoffs was falling in the Bucks' favor, but maybe it's everything's falling in the Suns' favor instead. And, we're not looking at it that way. But, I'm not going to be disappointed if the Suns win. I've been a big Chris Paul fan for a long time, and it's great seeing him in the finals.
Yeah, I mean, he's been one of the top point guards, so I think it's good for him. And frankly, it's good to see the Suns relevant again.
Yeah. I think 10 years ago was the last time they made the playoffs? Haven't made the finals since 93.
Yeah.
So, with Barkley leading the helm. So, but yeah, again, I want to say thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing more of your work as we get closer to the draft.
Thanks, Evan. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Have a good one.